Fresh data from Japan shows the country is undergoing its fastest inflation in 4 decades as post-pandemic demand drives costs up. Core inflation, which excludes volatile energy and food costs, was up 3.2% in May. That's lower than April, but still higher than analysts' expectations. The Bank of Japan is using low interest rates to stimulate the economy, which has not recovered to its pre-pandemic size. The bank's governor expects inflation for consumers to ease down to 2% later this year, but the latest data casts doubt on whether that will happen. For more, let's go to Jamil Ahmed in London. He's chief analyst at the brokerage GTC. Jamil, great to see you. We've heard a somewhat rosy prediction from the Bank of Japan saying that inflation will start to cool as soon as October. Is that a realistic prediction, and what will happen if Japan misses the mark?
This appears to be the narrative that's coming out of central banks, that inflation is just temporary. But in fact, the figures, which are the real facts, show that inflation is anything but temporary. Ultimately, Japan's seen its highest inflation levels now for 42 years. That's more than 4 decades. Although we did see a slight decline on April's figure, which was 3.4% annualized, we had 3.2% today. But ultimately, inflation remains significantly above the 2% goal of the Bank of Japan, which is the Japanese central bank. And now questions going to be asked if the Bank of Japan had to become more embattled in this fight against inflation, rather than just letting inflation gradually come down, because it looks like it's anything but temporary.
Jamil, is what's going on in Japan now similar to other post-pandemic inflationary periods we've seen elsewhere? I mean, can we get a sense of where Japan is headed from what has happened in other parts of the world, perhaps?
Ultimately, all economies, no matter where we sit and where we stand or what we watch for, are set in the exact same inflation storm. We hear from inflation and central banks worldwide that inflationary pressures are just temporary. We've been hearing the same tone now for just over 1 year. But the figures are the facts, and the details really there that inflation is anything but temporary. So ultimately, central banks are needing to become a lot more hawkish, which means that interest rates are going to remain higher for longer. And I think what central bankers really need to start telling us and communicating in their guidance is that higher inflation is much more of the new normal, and we're heading towards a new era of monetary policy, which is interest rate policy, where we all have to get used to interest rates being higher after we had interest rates at near record levels, record lows for close to a decade following the global financial crisis and the pandemic. And in fact, as we head further and further into the 2020s, we need to adapt that higher interest rates will be a new normal.
The figures are indeed the facts. Jamil Ahmed, live for us in London from GTC. Thanks for your expertise. Now to other top stories from around the world. The United States and India have agreed to settle 6 outstanding disputes at the World Trade Organization. That decision comes following a meeting between President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Washington. New Delhi also agreed to lift retaliatory customs duties on 28 American products, including chickpeas, lentils, and almonds. Zambia has reached an agreement to restructure more than $6 billion in debts owed to its biggest creditor, China, and other governments. The South African country's finance minister said creditors had accepted significant maturity extensions and reduction in interest rates. In 2020, Zambia became the first African nation to default on its debt after the pandemic. Hong Kong's Cathay Pacific Airways expects to return to profit in the first 6 months of 2023. The flagship carrier flew over 1.4 million passengers in May. The company posted record losses over the last 3 years due to COVID. Cathay is now benefiting from higher ticket prices and strong post-pandemic demand. The airline posted over $600 million in losses in the first half of last year.